Welcome back to my channel. So my name is Caitlin and this is Katnip Dreams of Food. If you've been following me for a little while, you know that in the past I did a lot of basically cooking tutorials, and for a while I was posting daily. So I updated you in my last video on the new project and my new upload schedule. So I'll start out with the upload schedule. I'm only going to be uploading once a week, and that's because the project that I've chosen is a little bit more detail oriented, and I also want to take the time to really edit these videos and give you the best content possible without rushing things. So the project that I'm going to be working on, which I talked about in my last video, which I'll link up above, the project that I'm working on is basically taking a bunch of my passions and putting them into one. So I'm very passionate about food and cooking, as you know if you've followed my channel, or if you stumbled across this, you can see it's a food channel. I love food and I dream of it. I also have a huge passion for teaching, history, anthropology, and research. And I know that doesn't sound like the most thrilling thing in the world, but I want to take the time to really research a culture and see what the origins of the food are, whether it's the ingredients, the food traditions. So that's where this kind of came from. But first I have to choose the country that I'm going to research, so hold on. So I purchased this globe, if you guys can see it. So last video I chose India, and the way that I did that is I just spun the globe and I randomly selected a country or region. And that's how I'm going to end every single video, so I can know exactly what the country is and what I need to research for the coming week. This is a project that I'm really excited about. So I'm going to take an entire week to actively research the culinary traditions of the history or region that I choose, synthesize that information, and then present it to you. And after I present that information to you guys, I'm going to choose a dish or two from that region or country and make it alongside with you. And when I make these dishes and when I select them, I'm going to probably choose dishes that I feel showcase ingredients that are very central to the culture or the cuisine of the country that I'm researching, or it's a dish that you see throughout the entire country or region. So it's either like an ingredient base or an actual recipe base. I know that it's kind of broad, but it depends on the country. For example, India, which I'll get into, is a massive country and so many different culinary traditions within the country itself. So I chose two ingredients to highlight, and I chose dishes based on those two ingredients, which you'll see later. So kind of back to the research. I love understanding how a culture's food evolves throughout time. How do climate, location, emergence of a new empire or dynasty, conflict, religion, and a multitude of other factors affect the food culture and food history. So that's what I intend to find out, and I'm really excited for this series. I have cited all of my sources in the description box down below, and specifically just for this video, I utilized lots of different types of resources. So I used some academic databases like JSTOR, which I'm a nerd at heart, and that's what I use in college all the time. And that's where I found some more recent articles, but I also thought it was really necessary to look at some documentaries. And the documentary was called King's Kitchens and Their Stories. And I thought that this was a really in-depth understanding of the food of the specific different regions of India, and it was very detail-oriented. So I'm gonna kind of talk in broad strokes when I talk about some of the food, just because that documentary series alone I think was 11 episodes and an hour a piece, and it highlighted a different region. So if you are looking to go more in depth past this video, I would really highly recommend that documentary. So like I said earlier, the country that I chose for this specific episode is India. So India is the 7th largest country in the world, and as far as population goes, it's the 2nd largest country in the world, with over 1.3 billion people residing in the country. So I think it's very safe to say that India is going to have a very large food culture, and it's going to have a lot of different influences, whether they're internal or external influences, as far as the cuisine and the ingredients that are present. And that is true. I found that in my research. So with that being said, I wanted to start out by understanding the key ingredients that are used throughout India, and kind of like almost a timeline of when ingredients first emerged in India, and maybe what other cultures brought to India, and how those ingredients have been really implemented into the more recent culinary traditions of India. So from about 3000 to 1500 BCE, people from the Indus Valley came to India. The really key ingredients that these people used used were they hunted alligator and turtle. And then some of the ingredients that they gathered include wild grains, herbs, and plants. And to further elaborate on that would be wheat, barley, tamarind, turmeric, eggplant, cucumbers, ginger, and garlic. These ingredients are still widely used today. I think that especially turmeric and tamarind I found to be used a lot throughout India's culinary history. So that's, I think, very interesting that from the very beginning there were certain ingredients that have been just transported throughout the entire time of India's culinary history. The people from the Indus Valley region occupied India for a very long time. So from 1500 to 1000 BCE, the Aryan-speaking people came to India and brought a lot of ingredients with them. Some of these ingredients include leafy greens, lentils, milk products, so ingredients like yogurt and ghee, which ghee is clarified butter and is used throughout Indian cuisine, and I noticed that as being a trend throughout the history of India. And they also brought cumin and coriander. In 530 BCE, people from the Persian Empire did come into India and bring some of their food tradition to the region. So some of those ingredients include rose water, raisins, almonds, and cashews. Black pepper is another ingredient that was used very early on in Indian tradition. So when I first thought of Indian cuisine, I really thought of like a lot of heat and like red chili peppers, but those didn't actually come to India much later in history. They actually were brought over from Mexico by the Portuguese settlers, but I'll get there. And from 340 BCE to 232 BCE, there was a huge emphasis on agriculture as being the cornerstone of the economic structure of India. From 180 BCE to 80 BCE, there was a lot of Greek rule in India. So the Greeks brought traditions from lots of different countries throughout the world, and India became an area where there was a lot of trade present, and that's very early on in India's history. From 75 CE, so Common Era, it's changed. It used to be AD back when I was in college, but it's CE, Common Era, so that's the era that we're in now. But from 75 CE to 450 CE was the golden age of, and I apologize if I mispronounce this, but the Gandhara civilization. Art, architecture, and food were heavily influenced by Buddhism. In 450 CE, India was invaded by the Huns. A lot of different food culture was brought to India. Another ingredient that I really thought that originated in India was tea, and I found out that tea actually came from China, which makes sense. But I always think of like chai tea is very traditional in India as a beverage, either early in the morning or late at night, and I thought it was kind of cool to see that it came from China. And we're gonna jump very far ahead in time, but from 1400 CE to 1600 CE, that's kind of when explorers from Europe and different parts of the world started coming to India. So a lot of different ingredients were brought to India. So for example, I mentioned earlier that red chilies were brought from Mexico by the Portuguese. I thought was really interesting. I always thought of chilies as being like, you know, one of the most important parts of Indian cuisine, and it currently is, but I thought it was interesting that it's really historically not been in India for a very long time. And then another ingredient that I see a lot in Indian cuisine, and even from my research, were potatoes. But potatoes are actually from South America. They're not indigenous to India. So they were actually brought from Portuguese, Dutch, and British explorers between the 1400s and the 1600s. It was hard for me to find a specific date, but those actually became a staple in the cuisine. So like I said, that's a very broad overview. I think like in the modern age, there's so much influence from other cultures in food, and we'll kind of get into that. But from a historical standpoint, I wanted to just kind of go through a very brief timeline of different, not only ingredients, but I wanted to show how different cultures really impacted. And like I said, India is an incredibly large country, so this is very broad strokes. So I can absolutely elaborate more on these time periods because I kind of, you know, I went very broad. Thought it was important just to kind of see what some of the ingredients that have been used since the beginning. So some other ingredients that I found to be very important to Indian cuisine, which I couldn't necessarily find when they first originated in the country, but would be pearl millet, which was actually, it's one of the few ingredients that can survive in a very hot and arid climate, and it's become very important to there's a region which I'll kind of talk about right next to, I think it's a desert. So if you can see this region right here, okay, right by this desert right here, on the border of Pakistan, is a very hot and arid climate, and pearl millet is one of the few ingredients that can live in such a climate like that. And some other ingredients that I found to be very important were cloves, And I think that that was probably brought from Central Asia, but I'm not 100% sure. I couldn't find where it originated, but as I continue to do this series, I'm sure I'll find where that ingredient originated. Then mango, which I think when I think of sweet dishes from India, I think of mango as being really important. So we've kind of talked about some of the ingredients, but I thought it would be important to include how the popularity of certain ingredients varies based on region and climate. So the northern part of India is a slightly colder climate, so some of the ingredients that you'll see become very popular would be like flatbreads and different bread dishes using wheat as a base. A lot of warming spices like nutmeg, coriander, cumin, cardamom, these spices that kind of warm you. So I thought that makes sense because in a northern climate, you want to be warmed with the food that you have. So in the southern part of India, the ingredients that are very popular would be rice as kind of like the starch base, red chilies, which we know came from Mexico, but they're very central to the cuisine, and garlic, ginger, hot spices, anything that's gonna make you sweat. And then two other ingredients that are used a lot in southern India would be tamarind, and then different sweeteners. So along the coast, apologize if I mispronounce this, I'm reading it. So Tamil Nadu translates to the land of temples, but this land is very fertile, and 27 varieties of rice are just present in this specific area. One of the most popular varieties of rice is Basmati rice, which I'm actually gonna be using today. But some of the other ingredients that are really popular in this region are curry leaves, but some of the other ingredients that are used are pomegranate, ghee, which is that clarified butter, yogurt, banana leaves as a vessel to actually eat food on, and then mustard leaves, lentil, and seafood because we're on the coast or other important ingredients in this region. So in large cities like Delhi, for example, which is one of the largest cities in India, it's going to be a melting pot of different cultures. A lot of influences from different parts of the world. You'll see a lot of ingredients from Central Asia, some ingredients from southern India, some ingredients from Southeast Asia, and British influence as well because it's a larger city and they're, you know, with British rule for a long time in India. Some of the ingredients that are very popular are potatoes, tomatoes, yogurt, and chickpeas. So these are just a few examples of ingredients and how they differ in each region, but I want to make it very clear that this is very, very broad, and if there is something you want me to elaborate on, or if you feel that there's a region that I've left out, please let me know and I would love to elaborate on it. As far as standard meal customs, and this is very general, but I learned that, you know, I'm used to eating, what, 3 square meals a day, maybe a snack or 2 or dessert. But in India, it's more traditional to eat smaller meals throughout the day. So for example, many people will start the morning by having a glass of chai tea with maybe like a small salty snack to start the day. And then a little bit later, we'll be having a breakfast that can include a lot of different things, but I found a lot of potatoes, either mashed potatoes covered in like a bread or like a crispy potato were consumed a lot. And then there's some sweeter versions where like a ground kind of wheat, I think of like cream of wheat with like different sweets and nuts and fruit on top. So I would say lunch seems, just from my research, seems to be one of the larger meals of the day. And that usually consists of rice or a type of flatbread, chapati, which is like a flatbread. And it was really thin. It almost kind of reminded me of a tortilla. And the rice and vegetables and the actual containers. And this is like for kids when they bring their food to school. It's called a tiffin, I think. And it's this little tiny container that you'll transport your lunch in. So it's very typical too to have an afternoon snack. Then the afternoon snack usually consists of tea and then some type of appetizer. Dinner tends to be a pretty small meal. It's usually just vegetables and some rice. And then it's very common for people to have some hot milk with maybe some cardamom or cinnamon and clove before bed. And I wanted to kind of close out my general historical overview of the culinary history of India, talking about some of the more modern traditions that you would see if you actually traveled to the country today. So I watched a documentary called Street Food Asia, and there was an episode in Delhi, and this is a melting pot of an area. One of the most important things to modern cuisine in India would be street food. And I know street food has become very popular throughout the world, but street food in the beginning was very essential because anybody that was working, it was a way to grab a very not large, but a very satisfying meal throughout the day. And it was a necessity at the time, but it's become very popular throughout the entire population. Anybody really eats street food. It's become very important to the culture. One of the names of like the street food was chaat. C-H-A-A-T, and that means to lick, like to lick your fingers, and it essentially refers to any fried like food. So chaat can refer to a multitude of different foods. So some of those include lots of different fried snacks. So Pani Puri, which I found an article just centered around that from BBC, and I'll link that down below. So it's essentially a dough disc filled with either like mashed potatoes or mashed lentils, and it's topped with a really thin chutney because part of the word means like water or liquid. So it's a very kind of wet chutney, and it might have some yogurts or some different vegetables on top, maybe some pickles. But another dish that's really well known is aloo tikki, which is crispy and like mashed and then kind of crisped up potatoes, and they're topped with a variety of ingredients kind of similar to pani puri, which could be like pickles, different vegetables, chutneys, yogurt. Kebabs of ground lamb are also seen in this area, which I thought was very interesting, cooked over an open flame mixed with some warmer spices. And some other important dishes are samosas, which are fried pastry filled with either like ground lentils or ground meat or vegetables, puree of vegetables with different spices. And I found these things called spiced water balls, which I couldn't really find a lot of information, but they almost looked like a sweet. I don't really know. I think they're maybe covered in tamarind. Please let me know if you know a little bit more about that, because I want to learn a little bit. So that's my incredibly condensed food history of India. This was incredible, and I'm glad that India was the first country that I chose at random. I learned a lot in just a week, and I mean, I could spend years just researching this country, and I want to continue to learn more about the food culture of India. So now it's time to cook. So the two dishes that I decided to make for today's episode, like I said before, both feature a key ingredient that I found present throughout all of India. So the first dish I chose to highlight lentils, dal. So it's a stewed lentil dish with different spices. And then the second thing is not as healthy, but it's highlighting rice, and it's called, I apologize if I mispronounced this, but kheer, K-H-E-E-R. And it's a sweet rice dish, usually topped with almonds or maybe some rose water and dried fruit. So let's get to cooking. So we're gonna actually start the rice pudding first. So we're gonna start off by doing 1/4 cup of basmati rice and 5 cups of milk, and they're gonna go directly in here. Alright, there's the finished product of the kheer, which is that rice pudding. It looks awesome, and I tried it. So I used about half the amount of sugar that the recipe called for, so feel free to add more if you'd like. We're gonna take our lentils, and we're gonna actually make sure that there aren't any stones in here. So we're gonna put a cup of these lentils on this plate, and we're just gonna separate. look awesome. Really excited about this, and it tastes delicious. Thanks so much guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video and I hope you enjoyed this series. So the last thing I have to do is pick a country for the next episode. So let's do that. So, looks like I chose the Philippines. This is crazy. I didn't even purposely mean to do this, but I've been wanting to learn about the Philippines for a really long time. So, the country that I've chosen would be the region I've chosen is the Philippines, right here. Yeah, I'm pretty excited. Do I have it? Yeah. I'm so incredibly excited about this. So, thanks so much for watching, guys. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next Thursday. Thanks.